The year is 1993, and some employees after hours at Nintendo created a game that would go down as one of the great Zelda games for the Game Boy. The game for its time sold incredibly well, and will forever go down as one of the best Zelda games to ever exist. With the unique mechanics of being able to switch out your sword from Link's normal equip slot, and the dropping of helpful items to boost Link's attack and defense, Link's Awakening would truly show the potential of the Zelda formula following the insanely loved A Link to the Past, released just a few years prior. A few years later, on the Game Boy Color, Nintendo would release an updated color version of Link's Awakening, known simply as Link's Awakening DX. This version included more color to the already colorful cast of characters and fantastic dungeon design, and even added a new dungeon known as the Color Dungeon, which would then give you a new tunic color with the respective effects pertaining to the Piece of Power and Guardian Acorn. Both versions of the game sold over 6 million copies and pushed the game to 2 generations of players. Little would the small team working after hours know that they would not only attract people to play the game for its interesting story, soundtrack, and gameplay, they would also attract a small group of people who would play the game for speed and break the game wide open. This is the world record progression for The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX. No save and quit, wrong warp, or out of bounds. One thing to note about Link's Awakening is the aforementioned free-form menu structure. This would allow you to mix and match different pairings of items and create results that would actually save time and create an interesting casual experience on returning playthroughs. Hidden features like the bomb arrow really made the menu an interesting concept. Another concept that would never appear in a Zelda game following this one is the dropping of Pieces of Power and Guardian Acorns. Pieces of Power drop after 32 kills and grant Link with double the attack power and a 1.5 times speed increase, while the Guardian Acorn only grants Link with double defense every 16 kills without taking damage. The dropping of Piece of Power would be essential to the speedrun and would become a staple in Link's Awakening and DX speedrunning from the very beginning. Some may wonder, what's the difference between Link's Awakening and Link's Awakening DX? Well, nowadays, that's a pretty easy question to answer from a speedrunning perspective, but from the time of release of the DX version, this question was up in the air. Was a new dungeon and colors really worth shilling in the extra dollars? Well, there are a lot of features of the original game that did not return in the DX version that would actually make the DX version seem inferior. While the original game was able to skip text boxes with the simple use of mashing the B button, the DX version lacked this feature alongside a slower menu fade-in, which would make every opening of the menu a slog and would lose you about 2 seconds each time you accidentally open the menu or put the wrong item onto a button. For a while, both versions were run, but the DX version would pick up the most steam as a speed game and show its colors, pun intended, more than people would think. Fast forward to 2003, and speedrunning at this point is fairly new. The main site to exist at this point is Twin Galaxies, and most of the interesting gaming records was focused in on the high score records for arcade titles. One man would throw his hat in the ring for Link's Awakening speedrunning, Ryan Williamson. On May 25th, 2003, Ryan Williamson would get a time of 2 hours, 15 minutes, and 23 seconds on the original version of the game. Now, it's important to note that this is not the DX version of the game, but considering that this is the first known record in the game, it makes sense to mention it, since running the DX version of the game would not come until much later in the 2000s. One important thing that makes this run not really count towards this video is the fact that the run used up and A strategies, aka saving and quitting. Even though I'm not really counting this run as a world record, this run will still be the starting point for future runs of both the original and DX versions of the game. An old Twin Galaxies post shows off his splits and gives us an idea of what exactly his route really was. Unfortunately, there isn't any existing footage of any of his records anymore, but from what it looks like on his splits, he basically just went through the game as you would in a casual playthrough, but at a much quicker pace and skipping the text. Now it's 2005, and we get the first run that has footage that we can actually view. Again, this is the original version of the game, meaning this holds no candle to what we were talking about today, but considering how minimal the differences known were at the time of the run, similar strategies were used, and it's safe to assume both runs evolved alongside each other until there was a splitting point where the runs would become completely different in style. The run itself was not entirely impressive, but did showcase the first of many concerns that would exist throughout the existence of both LA and LADX routing: rupee, bomb, arrow, and piece of power routing. Based on the ruling to not being allowed to die once during a run, that meant that stealing the shovel from the shop and then the bow after would be off limits and would force runners to have to route 200 rupees prior to D3. This run for its time was quite impressive and was a good proof of concept as to what the run would look like in the coming years. This run was actually ahead of its time with the use of a skip known as Flame Skip, or L2 Shield Skip, in which you dash while clipping into a wall to skip having to do D7 before D8 and give you a much stronger weapon to fight the Evil Eagle with. To say the least, this run had some obscure ways of dealing with dungeons and rupee routing, but at the end of the day, this was just the beginning. Now that we have a run to work with, let's create a flexible chart to showcase the route we have. So originally, we had the basic route of just going to the dungeons in sequential order, but now we have D8 before D7. So our basic order should look like this. Well, now we have to add some details to flesh this out. First we need to get rupees, to then get the Yoshi doll from the Trendy game in order to progress the story onto the point where we can then get Marin later. Then we are clear to do D1 and D2. We then have to return Bow Wow to Madame Meow Meow and purchase the shovel and some bombs with the 200 rupees we collected and steal the bow from the shop. Take the ocarina from the Dream Shrine, traverse Candlelit Castle in order to get the leaves for Richard in order to get the key to D3. Then clear D3 and turn in the stick that we got from the monkey when entering Candlelit Castle to Terran to get the honeycomb to then give to the bear so that we can bring Marin to the walrus and get the D4 key. Learn the Ballad of the Windfish from Marin, go to D4, leave, learn Mambo's Mambo, then go into D5 and proceed as normal until after D6, where we finish our rupee collection and get the Frolic Song of Soul from the Sign Maze and revive the rooster from Mabe Village. Take the rooster to where the D7 key is and retrieve the key and make our way over to D8 by doing Flame Skip and go through D8. Finish D8 and D7, then we finally go to the Windfish Egg and fight the Nightmare. And all I can say is, this was super complicated and took a lot of work to make. Anyways, this was what we had to deal with in terms of routing. A lot of rupees, fetch quests, and a lot of items. To say the least, there's a lot to keep track of. The following year would be the birth of the game appearing on the Speed Demos Archive, or SDA forums. Many ideas were discussed and would not even be seen for a long time, like Cool Kid strats, aka the pit walk over D1, Moblin Skip, perimeter walking, and many more. To say the least, the pioneers of the game were hard at work on their strats up until the end of D2. The forum itself mainly consisted of discussion between Tompa, TSA, Vorpal Edge, and Steralifer. They would constantly discuss routing in 2006, and they innovated beyond what many would consider to be possible at the time. Almost immediately, the pioneers looked at piece of power, bomb and arrow, and rupee routing. There would not be a clean run of the game without taking these into consideration. For a little bit, there was a phobia of taking the shovel from the shop for reasons, and would quickly change in the coming years when the first recorded runs of the DX version would emerge. One very important thing to mention from this time period is a trick theorized known as Rooster Skip. This skip was deemed impossible due to just how large the gap was at the time, but Tompa would figure out a way on August 12, 2006. By using a trick known as hookshot jumping, you could theoretically hop across the pit and get the D7 key without ever needing to wake the rooster in Mabe Village. Tompa was only able to get it once, and the idea of Rooster Skip would be dropped until a later date. The time period ends abruptly with a brief discussion regarding Rooster Skip, and then it just ends with a guy saying, "Neat!" It would not be until late 2009 where we would find LA and DX appear in discussion, but this time on the Zelda Speedruns forum. Sadly, most of the information from the time is lost due to the deleting of older content on ZSR, but from what we gather, the brewings of the future would be in the hands of the people on the ZSR forum. In fact, this is proven by many accounts of older runners and Tompa discovering that you can instantly break the genie's pot by just clipping into the wall and throwing the pot. This would save 2 cycles and a lot of time at that. Now it is time to cover the first recorded record of the game. Jacob gets the first world record time of a 1:34:09 at some point in mid-2010. It is important to note that there are records prior to this point by Michael TSA Damiani. As many of you know, TSA was found to have cheated many Zelda runs via the method known as splicing, which involves using segmented run methods and claiming to have done the run RTA, or real-time attack. What's funny is that TSA was caught by the very mechanic that makes the game so unique in the first place, the piece of power and the guardian acorn. In many of his runs, he seemed to kill enemies without a care and was somehow able to get piece of power drops in perfect spots despite his lack of care. Well, it was found that many of his acorn and piece of power drops were way off counter. As mentioned earlier, pieces of power only drop on the 30-second kill that is not a guardian acorn, and his runs were all way off that counter. The only way for his counter to be that far off is if he were to have died, or if he were to save and quit. At the time of his runs back in 2006, the rules on Twin Galaxies forbade any sort of dying. So with that cause for the counter reset out of the way, that only means one thing: splicing. With that cheater out of the way, let's talk about Jacob's run and how it kicked off what would be considered the modern era of LADX speedrunning. Despite some of the primitive strategies used to get through the dungeons, this run showcased what had been brewing on Zelda speedruns for the prior years. Implementations of an entirely new route that decided to split D4 into 2 halves and finish D4 after D7 and enact the rest of the route the same as the 2005 run, and the uses of quick kills on both Lanmola and the Genie showed just how much work was put into the run. Even an early Nightmare key jump in D5 was used. Unfortunately, the video cuts out after reviving the Rooster in Mabe Village, so we don't have much to go off of for the rest of the run, but Michael Tigger Wells' run on January 2nd, 2011, with a time of 1:29:20, which shows off what the rest of the route could have looked like. His run would show major optimizations implemented to D7 and D8 involving wall clipping into blocks, and Mambo's Mambo was used to crazy extents. For the uninitiated, Mambo's Mambo, a song for the ocarina, can be obtained by Mambo nearby D4 and can be used to warp to a specific warp spot on the map whenever the song is played, but also allows you to go back to the beginning of a dungeon without the use of saving and quitting the game. One of the most groundbreaking parts of this run is the piece of power route. It is true that the old LA run had some sort of piece of power route, but not to the crazy extent of Jacob and Tigger's runs. Many of the piece of power drops in this run were standard drops even in current era LADX runs. The sweetest part of this run was just how satisfying it is to realize that Facade literally can be taken out before the fight even starts. For the time, these runs were impressive and would set the groundwork for the rest of LADX speedrunning and would go uncontested until 2012, where Jacob would return with something mind-blowing. Jacob would set the record with a time of 1:25:29 on November 16th, 2012. And let's just say, this run was insane. Not only did this run take the route that Tigger did and expand upon it with new strats, this run showed out of this world gameplay and would be the first ever run to use a trick that Tompa theorized back in 2006, Rooster Skip. As mentioned prior, Tompa had discovered Rooster Skip via the methods of hookshot jumping, but considering that having to do 2 consecutive hookshot jumps in a row seemed almost impossible, no one thought of doing an RTA run with it, but Jacob did. Prior to the buffered method we have today, Rooster Skip would be the gatekeeper for any sort of PB attempt. Failing would lose roughly 30 seconds, and the chances of missing it were quite high based on the tight frame window to perform the hookshot jump. Jacob would not only be the first person to hold a record with Rooster Skip, but was also the first person ever to decide to use Rooster Skip and RTA at all, and would basically force any further runners who wanted to be on the top to follow in his footsteps and attempt Rooster Skip. Aside from the aforementioned trick, Jacob had a few more aces up his sleeve in terms of optimizations and route changes. For instance, opening D3 from the dungeon entrance with a cleverly placed clip, using bomb arrows to quickly take out the D4 boss, further use of Mambo's Mambo to quickly traverse D6, and just straight up skipping the dragon fight to get into D8. Yeah, For some reason, Nintendo forgot to code a hitbox for this guy when he first wakes up, so you can just kind of walk right into D8 since the loading zone is always there. Giacab would attempt the first instance of a Blob quick kill, but sadly failed, and then close out the run with the 125-29. As much as this run was impressive, there was still a lot to optimize, and in the next year, we will see LADX no save and quit world records change hands a lot. On June 23rd, 2013, Paladrima would take the record with a 124.44 and could be considered the point at which the route started to look like the route we have today. This run would throw out the old trend of not stealing the shovel and dying, and would actually opt to steal the shovel and get the bombs and bow much earlier than the other routes. Because this run would be the first to be recorded on the new speedrun.com, the restrictions of not dying from both Twin Galaxies and SDA would be forgotten and dying would be allowed. This would mean that the route for Enter D1 would be a lot nicer and would completely throw out all of the early game rupee routing just to get the shovel. What is notable about the start of this run is the run containing a skip that was theorized way back in 2006 known as Moblin Skip, where you wait for the Moblin to face upward nearby the tail key, then clip into the wall and hold up right while the Moblin shoots you and you damage boost across the gap, which cut out having to turn in the mushroom or collect early rupees to get the powder to save Terran and would save a ton of time. This Enter D1 route would stick for a very long time and would only be replaced by a slightly faster route that was found not too long ago. There was actually a new genie quick kill found around the time of this run that abused the new usage of bomb arrows to kill the genie the same way that we kill it in the run today, but this was not used for a little while. The most notable thing about this run is during the Enter D8 split following Rooster Skip, on the way to wake up the dragon to enter D8, Paladrima does a weird clink off the cliff and landed a bit inside the wall and abused that to then hop out of bounds. At the time, this would be known as the walking on ceilings glitch. You may ask, why is this allowed on the leaderboards if this is no save and quit, wrong warp, or out of bounds? Well, prior to the name of the category that we have today, the name was known as any percent warpless, no save and quit. The reason for this was there were no known methods to get out of bounds and break the game aside from this one trick. Wrong warping was only known about via the doghouse glitch, and that is implied in the warpless name, but out of bounds was fair game at this point, and would only get banned later on when Emuralas would post a video showcasing a huge abuse of out of bounds. Just a few days later, Paladrima would get a 123.23 with the same route and just clean up parts of his old run. A couple months later, Wazif got a 122.12, which unfortunately we are unable to watch today, but it is safe to be assumed that this run would be the last to contain the walking on ceilings glitch, and the last run before the big discovery by Emuralas in July 28th, 2013, Villa Skip. As mentioned before, normally you would have to get all the leaves from Candlelit Castle to give to Richard in order to get into his villa's garden in order to dig up the key to D3. Well, Emuralas found a way to skip that entire sequence of events by abusing the pit mechanics to make Link fall on the same frame that he enters the transition and warp him down into the villa garden. This would also skip having to go through the rest of the trade sequence prior to D3, since the game just assumes you have the stick at this point, which also saves a ton of time. This trick would save several minutes and would open up the category for easy world records. He would also discover two other tricks known as Jesus jumps and lava swimming. Just as they sound, Jesus jumps allow you to jump on the water if you jump on the same frame that Link is about to drown in the water and allow you to go to many places you aren't supposed to. And lava swimming allows you to swim in the lava of D8 by having Link not move at all while transitioning onto a lava tile. These tricks would not be used for a while, but were nice additions to the arsenal for potential reroutes in the future. Another change that occurred around this time would be the renaming of the category from Warpless to No Wrong Warp or Out of Bounds. After Emuralas released a video known as Warpless Gets Broken, the question as to whether or not to allow Out of Bounds would be brought up with the name changes going on in the A Link to the Past community. It seems suitable to change the name of the category and set Out of Bounds rules to prevent further breaking of the category as shown in Emurala's video. These new defined rules would only allow one tile out of the accessible area to be entered, but strictly ban transitioning on that tile. This would mean that the walking on ceilings glitch present in Paladrima's runs would be banned, but would this make getting further records harder? Of course not, because Villa Skip would be more than enough. Giacab would achieve a time of 1:15:35 on August 24th, 2013. This would be the first record to use the newly found Villa Skip and contained a few slight tweaks to the route that would overall save a lot of time. For example, a faster D3 route that was more focused, faster route to take Marin to the Walrus, and abusing wall clipping to kill the Zal on the other side of the room in D5 a lot quicker without having to go through the pool room. This run would also present another reroute in D7 that abused a hookshot jump that would allow you to skip the long backtrack to hit the last pillar. But we gotta talk about some real swag though. Obstacle skip. Other than that, this run built upon the last run with the newly found Villa Skip, but also contained movement that was far better than his predecessors. A few months later, on October 12, 2013, Giacab would set another record of 1:14:37 and basically just played better in his last run by a large margin, and would only add the new Genie Quick Kill that would mimic that of the modern Quick Kill on the Genie. Now that we have a solidified route to work with and a nice ribbon to tie off this era, let's dust off the chart we created earlier and edit some things. First off, let's change our dungeon order. Now we are going from D1 to D2 to D3 using Villa Skip to D4, then getting the flippers and leaving, to then get to D5, D6, D8 after Rooster Skip, then going to D7, and finally returning to D4, skip encountering the ghost, and going straight to the nightmare fight. Now let's just cut out the rupee routing at the beginning, add Moblin Skip, move the shovel bow and bombs to the beginning, and then cut out the need for the Yoshi doll and the rest of the side quests now that we have Villa Skip. Remove the need to get the rooster to get the D7 key, and now we should be good to go. This will be our running route for the next little bit. Now enter Leon Pao. Leon is a bit of a revolutionary in the sense that prior to his entry into the scene, all runs were done on the English 1.0 version of the game, and it was an unspoken rule that every run should be done on that version. Well, Leon would change that by deciding to run on the Japanese 1.0 version of the game that not only had faster text, but also added some instances of skippable text that was present in the Game Boy original, but not in the English version of LADX. Many of his runs on the Japanese version would not be submitted to the leaderboard, but his early records can be seen today as records due to the trend that Leon started by playing on the Japanese version. On November 11, 2013, Leon Pao would enter the world record scene with a 1:14:33. This run would be the first record set on the Japanese version, and the first run to implement the newly found Deathel Skip, which entails playing the ocarina on the same frame that a bat is about to move during the Ganon phase of the Nightmare fight, and it will get stuck. After fighting the Shadowland Mola, the game will spawn Deathel, but also kill the bat that makes the game think that you killed Deathel, and will spawn the staircase to the end of the game while the real Deathel still spawns. Also, he finally used boots on the Armos maze. Now let me tell you, when researching for this video, every run prior to this did not use the boots in the Armos maze while paired with the shield, and oh my god is that slower. Leon is a savior in not only the sense that he ran on JP, but also because he finally innovated in an area that had obvious time save. This next month or so would show the true dominance and quick improvement of Leon. In just 2 months, Leon dropped the time down by a total of 3 minutes. Needless to say, Leon was a monster. Leon over the course of early 2014 would pursue a better 100% time and paid little attention to no save and quit for a while. But on August 5th, 2014, Leon would get a small record of 1:11:27. He wasn't very pleased with this time, considering that it was such a small PB considering his upped level of play since running the game many months back. Leon would eventually bop his time with a 1:10:25 on December 7th, 2014. Around the time of the 1:11:27, Emmy Rallas would come out of the woodwork with a new discovery, shack jumps. Soon after, he would find super jumps, but unfortunately, both were almost immediately banned. It was unsure what the potential of shack jumps and super jumps were, but it was quite obvious that out of bounds was inevitable. To put it simply, shack jumps are performed by holding a diagonal into an interactable object and then jumping and then holding forward. This would treat Link as if he were jumping off of a ledge from the position he was in, and would make him able to jump over objects that would normally not be passable, aka walls. Same is true for super jumps, but could be performed on a solid wall that is not right next to a corner by being clipped into a wall, jumping, holding back on the wall, and then forward while using the bow, magic rod, or sword. It would not be until late March where shack jumps and super jumps would be allowed in runs. Leon's 1:10:25 would be the last no save and quit record before both techniques were allowed. His 1:10:25 will go down in the history books as a solid run with that route and show just how good Leon was at the game. 2015 rolls around, and the community has no idea what would hit them. The start of the year would contain a timing change for all runs of LADX that ended on the staircase from touching the stairs to the white fade after climbing the stairs. This is because during an any % unrestricted world record run by Green Tunic, he performed Death'll Skip and died after the timer had stopped when touching the stairs. The community decided to agree to change the timing to white fade and never turned back. What seemed like a major shift would unknowingly be minimal in the face of what would happen later this year. After the unbanning of super jumps in late March, Leon almost immediately snatched the record with a 1:08:38, completely destroying his 1:10 and showing the power of super jumps. Many segments are optimized like D6. Most of the linear nature of D6 was completely destroyed with the use of a super jump that would get the Nightmare Key early and make almost half of D6 obsolete. This route also skipped the annoying horse heads, which took out the major headache of throwing the horse heads and hoping for good RNG. D7 experienced yet another reroute that heavily abused super jumps even more. Super jumps were used to get around all of the headaches that were caused by having to take long paths to get the metal ball to the pillars. Needless to say, D7 was D7. D8 was also completely destroyed by super jumps. By abusing super jumps, most of the weird routing of D8 was gone, and you basically just got some keys, got the magic rod, got the nightmare key, and just went straight to hothead without hesitation. This one also showcased the first use of Blano Skip, which would actually get banned under the Seabass rule set for out of bounds later this year, but would not be enforced until July 7th, 2016, where Rapid Underscore would have his run rejected with the use of Blano Skip. Though this run wasn't great, Leon's first record with super jumps showed how insanely huge just this one trick was for the run. On April 4th, 2015, Green Tunic would discover the seeds of the future when he finds a boss tech skip for the Nightmare fight.
Okay, so, I'm going to show you the Nightmare text skip, the dialogue skip, whatever you want to call it. I'll basically show you a few times first what it looks like, and then I will tell you how to do it. And yeah, we can see how much time this could possibly save. But yeah, so I'll show you what it looks like.
Though it was not well understood at the time, it seemed like a nice 10-second time save. Green Tunic had some idea of what would be discovered later, but boy did he not know that he was on to something with this discovery. I'm pretty sure bombs are the key thing here, so let's make sure to mash whichever button you have these equipped to. Liam would get a 1:08:01 on April 16th, and boy was this a run. The movement and overall execution of the tricks were a lot better than that of his last run, but there were many drawbacks that stopped this run from being the 107. One major one being Rooster Skip. Rooster Skip has taken many victims since Giacob used it in his 127, but it didn't claim Leon. Despite the setback of Rooster Skip, Leon was able to pull through and get a new record, but it wouldn't matter anyways, since just a few days later, on April 22nd, Leon would finally get the 107 with the 107.50. Soon after, the E7 would get some major optimizations, because of course it did. With a new hookshot clip bound by Riddler and a super jump that allowed to skip fighting the mid-boss and obtain the Nightmare Key, which was found by both ZorlaxSeven and Riddler. All you had to do was super jump in the room with the P-Hat and the Beamos and clink off the P-Hat with your sword and land on the switch blocks to completely skip ever needing the Nightmare Key. And speaking of Zorlax, let me introduce you to him with this nugget of information. He decided to grind no save and quit runs that were done prior to the uses of super jumps and achieved a 108.48. If that sounds impressive, it's because it is. Zorlax is a madman and left a huge mark on the LADX speedrun community as a whole. Now, why am I talking about Zorlax? Well, he gets a 105.41 on May 30th, which completely smashes Leon's old record and implements a ton of new strats. Not only did he implement the strats mentioned earlier to D7, he implemented a super jump to clink off the P-Hat in D4, which completely negated the need to deal with the RNG in the title room and having to go into the underground portion of D4. Zorlax also completely outclassed every bit of movement that Leon slipped on. He was known for just how insane his execution was, and it is pretty obvious in his world record run why people would think that. The only thing that held this run back from getting a 104 was the fact that he not only got bad RNG on Agahnim, but he also missed Death'll Skip, which cost him the 104. But don't worry, he got the 104 just a few days later on June 2nd, with the 104.48. Though this run was not as impressive as his 105 in terms of movement and trick execution, he was still able to save the run with a good nightmare fight and reach the first sub 105 time in LADX history. He would then get a 104.23 on July 24th, and this would be the last run with this route. Just a few days later, Flock discovered a way to skip the owl text on the tail key chest by opening the menu right after opening the chest, then opening the save and quit menu right after closing the menu, and then just holding down and skipping ever talking to the owl. This was a nice time save and is still used to this day. Flock didn't have enough though. Just a few days later, he would discover what would be known as Flock clips. To put it simply, if you're clipped into a wall and hold up diagonal or down diagonal on an interactable object that gives you text hinting at what you're supposed to do to it, you'll be pushed into the wall and you're able to walk past the object itself. This trick would be used in a lot of areas, like after saving Bow Wow, to completely skip having to go through the whole swamp. With Flock's new discoveries in tow, Zorlax a few days later got a 103.24 on July 30th and abused Flock clips to an extent that saved a lot of time throughout the run. An example would be the use of a Flock clip to skip the need of another key in D3. But now it is time we talk about something very important. Gather around, boys and girls, as I tell you the tale of what could be considered the craziest 2 days in LADX history. Following the discovery by Green Tunic, there wasn't much time sunk into figuring out what happened, but Riddler discovered on August 9th that with the same methodology as the Nightmare Text Skip, you could keep the raft and use it on the land. By dropping bombs while falling down the waterfall in the rapids, you could trigger the game to think that you were still on the rapids and use the raft whenever you want. This is what would be known as a bomb trigger, and explains exactly what was going on earlier in the year with Green Tunic's discovery. With Riddler's discovery of the bomb trigger for the rapids, this rekindled interest and would lead to something huge. Literally the next day, Flock discovers a bomb trigger variant of Walrus Skip. Now let me clarify why I say bomb trigger variant. A while before bomb triggers, there was a theorized way to do Walrus Skip by Amurallus that involved digging up a bunch of stuff on the screen next to the walrus and passing the sprite limit in order to despawn the walrus. This method was not only super luck dependent, but was not super well understood and was thrown to the wayside for being way too inconsistent for any human player to even try. That doesn't matter now, because Flock would use a similar concept to both the Nightmare Text Skip and the Raft on Land bomb trigger, and transition to the screen with the walrus by placing a bomb right before transitioning and right after transitioning, and trigger the walrus cutscene to start without Marin. But that's not all. On the same day, both Green Tunic and Flock discover a way to skip ever needing the Frog Song of Soul by doing the same thing as Walrus Skip, except onto the screen with the entrance to D8. This means that there is no longer a need to collect 300 rupees to get the Frog Song of Soul, and makes rupee routing no longer a concern in any percent. Oh, and if that wasn't enough for you, on the same day, Flock and Riddler discover a way to bomb trigger the Instruments cutscene in front of the Windfish Egg without the Ocarina, which completely cut the Ocarina out of the route and meant that major reroutes would be had for the entire run. With all this in mind, we needed to talk about some interesting consequences that followed the introduction of bomb triggers, and namely Walrus Skip. Bow Wow. Up until now, I haven't mentioned him much since the route only had him for a short period of time and there was nothing to note. Well, Bow Wow would never have to be returned and would become a permanent party member for the rest of the run. Now, Bow Wow is actually a nice time saver in terms of helping with the Armos maze and eating cutscenes on occasion, but there's an elephant in the room that makes this chain chomp much worse than anyone could have ever expected. Let's just say Bow Wow has a tendency to eat a lot. And by a lot, I mean a lot. What used to be a nice and tame route in terms of piece of power routing turned into an utter nightmare as Bow Wow randomly decides to eat enemies on a given screen, and there is rarely anything you can do about it. The biggest RNG problem arises with Rooster Skip. Rooster Skip, as mentioned before, can be a run killer due to the precise nature of hookshot jumps. Well, it gets even worse when you factor in that Bow Wow can just clink your hookshot and make you fall. Bow Wow made an already difficult trick even harder, and would claim many more victims in the years to come. Now with this massive new discovery, a new competitor would enter the ring. Darko. Darko had been running the game for a while, but just couldn't catch up to Zorlax in terms of raw gameplay execution and overall consistency. But with the discovery of bomb triggers, he would finally have his time in the light. Over the course of just 4 days, Darko would do something legendary. The very next day, Darko would test out the new route and get a 102.38, which smashed the previous record by over a minute. This run applied all of the tricks discussed earlier, but also added a bomb trigger to D7, which skipped bringing the ball to the 4th pillar. The run itself contained a lot of mistakes and contained a lot of outdated movement tech, but it cannot be understated the fact that this run would be a good proof of concept for what bomb triggers had to offer in the future. Another thing to note is the fact that because we don't get the Ocarina anymore, Deathel Skip would be shafted and we would now have to use arrows on Deathel again. The following 2 world records should speak for themselves. That's right, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening DX on August 17th, 2015 would break the sub-hour barrier. Many speed games have this mythical goal time that people sought out from day one, and some would say that such a feat would be impossible. One such barrier for a lot of games hovering around the 1 hour mark is sub 1 hour. Even if this time is super arbitrary, it cannot be understated how big of a deal this was. With Darko's 59.58, there's a lot of experimentation and new concepts thrown around. One such concept is no longer using Blano Skip. At this point in time, based on the Seabass rule set, Blano Skip would technically be breaking the rules, but most people didn't really acknowledge it. Blano Skip didn't really save any time with the new route as is due to the fact that there is no way to just get back to the beginning of D8 without saving and quitting due to the lack of Mambo's Mambo. To say the least, this run was impressive just because it was sub-hour, but that excitement would be short-lived as Zorlax jumps back in with style the very next day. he gets a 58-24, but not in the way you would expect. Let's just say he did an interesting route. Let me just lay down his route real quick. After D2, he goes to the forest, returns Bow Wow, then grabs the ocarina, and then goes to do Villa Skip. But that's not all. He then goes to grab Mambo's Mambo after D4, and all I have to say is, this is slower. Watching this back for the video confused me, and oh my god, I had to actually leave the room and come back to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. What made me think this was the case was the fact that the last 10 seconds of the run was just Zorlax jumping around the staircase after defeating Deathel. Despite how ludicrous this run was, he was still able to save over a minute compared to Darko's run just because of how insane Zorlax is. You can take a way slower route and still get a massive world record. One innovation that came with Zorlax's record was a new setup for Walrus Skip known as the Zorlax method, which was not only more consistent, but just an easier method that only lost about a second compared to the initial setup found by Emuralas. Zorlax would beat his record on November 1st, 2015, and would barely miss the sub 57 mark, but would still get a 57 nonetheless. What is notable about this run is that Zorlax actually did the route that Darko did, and not his wacky route that he did in his last record. This would be the last record of 2015, and boy was it a good way to end the year. 2015 is held to be the golden year in LADX speedrunning just because of how much was found and how much time was shaved off the record in just that year alone. There would not be another time in the history of LADX speedrunning where so much would be discovered and implemented. This year solidified the dominance of Zorlax and broke a category that was already under heavy stipulations even more than anyone could have thought after renaming the category to No Wrong Warp or Out of Bounds. Zorlax would open 2016 with a 56-47 on January 6th and would go on a crazy rampage over the next couple months, which was the first time in LADX history where someone dropped the time so rapidly with the same route. It cannot be understated how big bomb triggers were, and Zorlax would prove what had initially been shown by Darko back in August 2015 to be even more true. After just 4 months of grinding, Zorlax had brought the time to a 55-53 on the dank day of 420. This run would showcase the current D7 route with bomb triggers to knock down the rest of the pillars, which made it so we would never have to carry this stupid metal ball ever again. To say the least, this run was incredible. It was hard to overstate how good Zorlax was at the game. When Zorlax got on a good run, you knew it was going to be an insane run. Considering how dominant Zorlax was over the past couple of years, you may think that he had the world record on lockdown for the rest of the year, right? Wrong. There was one man who would keep him in check. Many of you know who he is, and I would consider him one of the legendary speedrunners of the modern era. Every game that he touches, he always seems to bring it to the next level. Whether it be Undertale or Celeste, this man brings up the heat. I am of course talking about the legendary TGH.
That's fucking record. That's it. Holy fucking shit, dude.
You heard me right. Before TGH would dominate the Celeste scene and become extremely good at A Link to the Past, he was an active LADX runner, and let's just say, he was really good. On May 2nd, 2016, TGH would achieve a 55-30. This run was mind-blowing. The This run had insane RNG on all fronts and had better gameplay than Zorlax's last run, which was thought to be insane on its own. That same month, Zorlax would fire back for the last time with a 55-20 on the 23rd and show TGH that he wasn't afraid of him and kept him in check. TGH would not be discouraged though, as in just a couple months, on August 12th, he would get a 55-11 and he would establish his dominance over LADX. Pretty soon after, Teej would get the first 54-minute time of 54:59 on September 13th and showed a new route that makes us have to change our chart up a bit more. Let's bring back the chart once again. Now that we have super jumps and bomb triggers, we have a lot to change here. Let's get rid of the Ocarina, Marin, Ballad of the Windfish, Frog Song of Soul, and just the whole trade sequence altogether. Now to get to the meat and potatoes of this new route. Everything stays the same up until after D6. Normally, we would go to D8 after D6 to get the magic rod and take care of the east half of Koholint at the end. Well, in this new route, things would actually straighten out a bit in terms of dungeon order, and we would instead take a swim over to D4 to finish that off after D6 instead of going straight to D8. The old route worked before when the Ocarina was in the picture, because you could just use Mambo's Mambo to quickly get to Tall Heights and skip having to worry about extensive overworld movement. With this new innovation, this would move D7. The whole point of doing D4 last was because D7 has a path straight to D4, which cut out a lot of unnecessary movement. But now that we are doing D4 after D6, that would mean it would make more sense to get D7 out of the way after Rooster Skip so that there isn't any excess backtracking after D8. This would make our new route as follows. Steal the Shovel and Bow, go to D1, save Bow Wow and go to D2, do Villa Skip and go to D3, do Walrus Skip and then go to D4, grab the flippers and lead to D5, get the key to D6 and go there, finish up D4, do Rooster Skip and go to D7, then use bombs on Evil Eagle instead of the magic rod, then head over to D8 and complete the dungeon, then fight the nightmare in the Windfish Egg. Pretty clean, huh? A lot better than that route that we had 6 years ago. TGH would continue his rampage soon after with a 54-31 on September 26th, and then ending the year with the 54-12 on December 28th. What is notable about the 54-12 is the modern D6 route. Gone are the days of fighting the stupid dog to get to the facade boss fight. All you had to do was set up a super jump to get to the Dodongo's room and make your way through that way. What would make this route just as annoying as the dog were these two things. Horse heads. Unless you're a Bamboo Shadow with the magic cartridge, these things are infuriating. With how optimized things were beginning to get, a 20th try horse heads was not gonna cut it. Having to roll the dice of a 25% chance of success is less than fun to deal with and can lose you several seconds alone and decide whether or not your D6 is good or not. At the beginning of 2017, Black SR would enter with his first world record time of 54:04 on January 7th. Black is an insane player, and it's always exciting to see someone new throw their hat in the ring for the world record to make the next world record feel that much more exciting. Him and TGH would be on par with each other for a while. Black's run would improve upon the movement and RNG of Teej's last run, and included a new big skip in D3, Dodongo Skip. This new skip would skip having to fight one of the Dodongos and make it so you didn't have to get an extra key. The only thing that would be risky is the fact that if you do a late super jump, you will clink off the Dodongo late and get stuck in the block, soft locking, and would result in an instant reset. Since you had to do this twice, it added a lot more of a risk factor to D3. Black would also take a slightly slower route in D8 that would take out the enemy RNG of the Dark Room, which made it more consistent. This record would not last long, as Teej would get a 53-44 on the 9th and add another element of RNG to the run. The run did include early sword, which saved a couple of seconds over the old way of getting the sword, but more importantly, it included a trick known as Goomba Surf. As mentioned all the way back when Zorlax started running, you would normally clink off the P-hat during a super jump in D7 to skip fighting the mini-boss. Well, what if I told you there was an even faster way of doing so? If you clip exactly 1 pixel into the wall, which will allow you to super jump, you can wait for one of the Goombas to move to the exact right spot, do a naked super jump, land on the Goomba, and just barely make it to the top ledge. This trick is extremely RNG dependent and could sometimes be slower than doing the old route. But this new trick saved enough time getting it 4th try would be faster. With the established route and lots of new RNG thrown into the mix, it was time for competition to get fierce. Flak would get a 53.42 on February 2nd and then a 53.30 on the 4th with the same route, but would only get bopped by a no wrong warp or out of bounds runner, Hanky Panky, on the 11th with a 53.26. It seemed like sub 53 was in the cards at this point. With the new route becoming optimized, the 52 was bound to happen soon. At this point, no save and quit was becoming very optimized, and saving time was becoming difficult with the major elements of RNG. Whether it be Villa Skip, Horse Heads, or even the blue balls in the Nightmare fight, you were never safe until the end. Well, on February 26th, 2017, Hanky Panky would make history with the first 52-minute time of 52.59. He barely made it, but this time was insane. This run had almost perfect RNG and gameplay that was out of this world. Just in this month alone, the world record had been beaten more times in a single month than any other month in LIDX speedrunning history. Hanky Panky's time was legendary and would set a higher bar to overcome for anyone attempting to beat his time. You may wonder, how could someone possibly beat such an insane run? Well, let's just say you have to play out of your mind and get absolutely perfect RNG. And of course, be TGH.
We don't even need perfect RNG, we just need decent RNG. Come on! Yeah! We fucking did it! Dude.
On May 17th, 2017, TGH would be on the run of his life with a time of 52.44. This run was, and still is, legendary. Just seeing how tight Teej's movement was and how crazy the RNG was alone would make this run legendary. The grind was a struggle. I remember watching the grind as Teej would continually get close and lose it to bad RNG. Being able to beat Hanky Panky's 52.59 in and of itself was a crazy feat that would take someone very committed to the game to even compete with. Teej had that commitment. Seeing this run live was an emotional experience. Though there was nothing new, the time save just kept adding up. With absolutely perfect RNG and insane execution, many would consider this to be the death of LADX no save and quit. Many thought this category was at its limit, that it would take a run that was even more insane to even compete with such an amazing run. TGH would quit grinding LADX and only really played it for his SGDQ run and for a tournament that would occur a few months later. Even if there were a few falters in D8, you still had to match the almost perfect gameplay and RNG leading up to it. To prove how insane this run was, the record stood for 8 months. That is the longest a record had stood since the initial records back at the beginning of this game's life as a speed game. Would anyone be able to beat this run without any sort of route change? The answer, unfortunately, is no. On January 25th, 2018, Black would finally dethrone TGH as the king of LADX no save and quit. How did he do it? Well, with some massive tweaks to the route, perfect RNG and movement wasn't an issue anymore. So to explain this run, Let's bring up the chart for the final time. Right off the bat, things change a little bit. Instead of getting the powder from the trendy game, you instead get the mushroom to perform a trick known as a mushroom hover. If you fall down a pit and pull out the mushroom, it would put you at the very bottom of that tile, and sometimes allow you to just walk past the pit, or clip into a wall if you fall into that wall through the pit. With this, you could save time in D1 and skip having to get the powder from the trendy game. The only downside is that you have to turn in the mushroom to the witch to get the powder for the 2 torches at the beginning of D2. Then after D3, instead of going to D4, you get the D6 dungeon key from fighting the Armos Knight and do a trick like mentioned earlier, known as a Jesus jump, to get to D6 without the flippers. If you line yourself up at a certain tile when going to D6, you can skip needing the flippers and can go straight to D6. After D6, you then do Jesus jumps to the left and then go straight to D4. The ghost only spawns after getting the surf harp only if you don't go below a certain part of the map, or, weirdly enough, if you don't have the level 2 bracelet. So because we get the level 2 bracelet from D6, we can just finish up D4 in one go. The rest is the same up until D8, which would then add a new trick that would reroute the entirety of D8. This trick is known as bookshot, and only works if the hookshot is on the B button. If you stand in one of 2 pixels in the room with a key block, you can clip in without needing the key, which would completely skip having to get a bunch of keys in the left half of the dungeon before getting the magic rod. Then all you need to do is lava swim to the eye statue to get the single key and kill the ropes and Vire to fight the cue ball and then finish the dungeon. These reroutes alone saved over 30 seconds and made taking the record not as insanely difficult as before. LADX no save and quit would get quiet for a little while, as this would be the longest the record would stand for in history. All of these new reroutes were a massive community effort, but there was one man who is an innovation machine, and he is also just an insane player in general. His name is Sagaz. Mainly known for his efforts in 100%, Sagaz is an insane player that is never afraid to pull all the stops and innovate like no other. He shot down from a 108 to a 100 in just one run when he first started, and all I can say is, what? Anyways, on February 27th, 2019, this happened.
Oh my god, I did a new world. Oh, yes! Oh my god! I never thought that was the... I never think about world record with this run, but it's world record. Yes! Oh my god!
That's right. Sagaz lowered the record and would continue to take the record over the course of the next 2 months with a 52.24 on April 11th and a 52.22 on April 21st. Sagaz is mainly known for his efforts in other categories, so he gave No Save and Quit a break after this run, but the record would not stand for long. Vlak would come back with a 52.20 on April 29th. With just a few minor optimizations here and there, sights were set on sub 52. Seisei would barely miss the sub 52 on May 18th, 2019 with a 52.02. This run was insane, and honestly, the RNG and gameplay from Seisei was so good that if just one mistake wasn't made, the sub 52 could have happened. Following this point would be a massive discovery. Remember those blue balls on Agahnim that I mentioned earlier as a source of RNG at the end of the run? We don't need to worry about those anymore. Why? Well, it's because Vlak is a madman. On May 29th, 2019, Vlak would present the community with something massive: Blob and Agahnim manipulation. If you don't slash your sword when charging up to defeat the Blob, and then place a bomb after you hear the first hit, you will kill the Blob 100% of the time, and never have to worry about the 50-50 shot like before. The Agahnim manip, though, is a bit more complicated. I won't go into full detail because it's insanely complicated, but to basically explain it, if you stand in certain positions based on where Agahnim last was, you will always get an energy ball to hit back and never have to worry about blue balls. And with Spicefather's Android app, you're also able to know exactly what pixel you need to be on to ensure that the manip works every time. With this new manip, this meant that the only element of RNG on the Nightmare fight was whether or not Deathel would decide to open its eye. Just a couple months later, something legendary happened. Everything had been culminating to this point. Ever since the 52, the thought of a sub 52 was insane, and as mentioned earlier, Seisei almost had it. Well, on July 17th, 2019, everything came together. From all the route changes since the days of Giacob and Tigger77 to Lianpao and the reign of Zorlax and Bomb Triggers to TGH seemingly killing the category to the massive discoveries in late 2017 to the newly discovered Blob and Agahnim manip, it finally happened. Flack would make history with the first ever 51-minute time of 51:59. This run was the first to have everything discovered that was possible and was absolutely insane. What makes this even bigger is that literally just a few days later, on July 21st, he would beat his time and get a 51:56. This just shows the mental barrier that came with no save and quit. Both runs were out of this world, and that's where the record stands. The LADX speedrun community has come a long way with any % no save and quit. What used to be just any % no save and quit evolved over time into any % warpless no save and quit, and then to what is known as today as any % no save and quit, wrong warp, or out of bounds. From the days of Twin Galaxies to that of Speed Demo's Archive to the now modern speedrun.com, from the era of Giacob to Lianpao to Zorlax to TGH to the modern era, from the walking on ceilings glitch to super jumps to bomb triggers to literally manipulating most of the final boss. We have come so far as a community, and I'm excited for what is to come in the future. What insane discoveries will be found in LA, DX, and the upcoming Link's Awakening Switch. I want to congratulate all of the world record holders, runners, glitch hunters, routers, and community members, new and old, for their amazing work on creating such an amazing community that has made this small Zelda game on the Game Boy and Game Boy Color into the amazing speed game it is today. I want to also thank everyone who helped contribute to this video. Everyone has been very supportive of this, and I'm happy that I was able to present the entire history as we know it for this game. I can't name everyone, so I'm just going to have everyone's names appear on screen. This has been a lot of work, and now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to prepare for Link's Awakening Switch. This has been the world record history for The Legend of Zelda, Link's Awakening DX, any %, no save and quit, wrong warp, or out of bounds. I've been Astronomus, and I thank you so much for watching.